This episode of the AIXR podcast is brought to you by our friends at Zapper. If you're in the XR space, you've probably felt the pain of juggling different tools, vendors, and platforms just to get an AR or VR project off the ground. It's exhausting, and it can really slow you down. That's where Zapper comes in. They've built a complete suite of tools and creative services all under one roof to make creating immersive experiences not just possible, but practical. Their next-gen 3D web tool, Mattercraft, is a game changer for building immersive experiences for headsets, smartphones, and AR, VR, and WebXR. It combines the power and flexibility of the 3JS rendering engine with a rich visual editor, making it super intuitive and easy for designers and developers to use. Put simply, you get the creative freedom of a powerful 3D engine with none of the headaches. So if you're ready to take your immersive projects to the next level, head over to zapper.com and see what they can do for you. The guest segment of the AIXR podcast is sponsored by the new Luma series of Viture XR glasses. Viture is the quiet giant of video smart glasses, preferred by gamers and #1 in US sales. The expanded 52-degree field of view shows me a virtual 152-inch screen. Viture's new Vision Pair 3 DOF allows me to anchor that virtual screen in space, like a real TV. With 1,000 nits of brightness, you don't need shades to see it in the sun. For productivity, I can throw up multiple screens. The new Luma series enables 2D images and videos to be converted into 3D in real time. Go to luma.viture.com or Amazon and get yourself a pair today. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Schilowitz and Roni Abovitz for the AIXR podcast. It's July 18th, 2025.
Good morning,
guys.
Nice to see you again. We've seen each other a lot this week because we did a podcast yesterday about the salient topic of AI in our business for Digital Hollywood, and then you and I have been on other sessions for Digital Hollywood this week. So it's been a busy week on these kind of video podcasty type things. Very interesting.
Wasn't Rob Minkoff, the Lion King guy, electric on that podcast?
Terrific. Yes.
He was great. And by the way, our guest has arrived. Hi, Chris.
Yeah, so he can join us for the news conversation.
Yeah, we're having a little dog trouble here. We're getting started, so we're about 10 minutes late, Chris. So I was about to actually prime the audience for your entrance and talk about your book, but we'll get to it in a minute. On the news side, so we usually, it's a daily show format. We hit the news and do some light opinion banter, and then we bring in the guests for the balance of the show. So one of the things that Moon Valley raised $84 million from General Catalyst, Koshla, and CAA because they have this ethically sourced generative video model called Mary, which has been adopted by Adobe, of all people, which indemnifies its users from copyright claims with its Firefly model, and is now going to be in its enterprise suite also offering Mary. So that is a big deal for those guys, I think, and puts them in a very strong competitive position with professional users. Big shout out to our friend Eliza McNitt. She is hopefully going to be on the podcast early next year. She is the president of the immersive jury at the Venice Film Festival.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a nice step for her.
Go ahead.
No, she's an icon, right? In terms of the work that she's done in immersive and stayed with that art form and worked with notable other figures like Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah,
and
he's our partner.
A number of interesting projects. So
yeah. So here's a fun one. And then we'll move on to these strange new minds. Grok has introduced a character AI like avatar, and it talks to you. You fire up your avatar, and it's naughty, right? So there's one that's naughty and one that's nutty, and those are the only two they have right now. Like one's a demented cartoon cat, but the other one is this very sexy anime girl. And she will, unlike character AI, she will go all the way.
Mm.
I mean, and apparently the animations get more and more provocative. The Verge wrote a story saying there are just no guardrails on this thing. Not only can you go there, but she's fast. So I did not, by the way, in my testing of it, there was so much latency. I lost interest after about a minute. But it is very, very unexpected in a mainstream app like that, which is usually generally neutral. So, yes. Right. Final news story. Grok has dropped something, characters, avatars that are going to compete with character AI. In fact, the one I tested, Annie, there are 2 available now, is better than the ones character AI has, although they will improve and add animations over time. Okay, last news story, and then we'll get to Christopher and Strange New Minds. Grok just launched an updated version to much fanfare. And this updated version it includes character avatars, they're chatbots, like character AI. Mm-hmm. And they have one Annie and another one that's kind of a nutty cartoon character. And Annie is an anime girl who is very flirtatious and provocatively dressed. Here's the punchline. According to The Verge and several other independent writers, Annie will go all the way. In fact, the animations get more and more provocative the more time you spend with her and the racier the conversation gets. And of course, and there are no guardrails.
And Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't Grok the same Grok that just landed a very large government contract, even though Elon and Trump are still tiffing and, battling out in the schoolyard? So the world we live in is a fascinating melange of connections and bizarre moments. Roni, you must have something to say about this.
Well, because Chris has a book about strange minds, I think what we're experiencing is not the strange mind of AI, but this is Elon's mind amplified. Like, it's like the id of Elon just thrust upon the world, whether you like it or not. That's what this is. I mean, these AIs are actually somewhat personal. It's like a funhouse mirror of their creators. Yes, blended with all of our minds, and you have this mixing board, and you like surface good or bad things, and we're seeing those things surface in Grok. So, I can't imagine though how advertisers notice how Linda is gone, the CEO. She was trying to bring great brands into the organization, and now how do you explain to like a Disney or wherever that there's like a rated R anime girl and like a farting hippo, whatever the thing is? I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you're like an institutional fund that's like anything Elon does, I'll give him $50 billion. You're probably wondering, was that the best thing I ever did right now? Because maybe he's disintegrating, maybe he's not, maybe it's genius, maybe it's total madness. Who knows at this point?
Teenage boys around the world and men with teenage boys inside them are rejoicing.
Right.
I mean, Elon is just cackling away with entertainment and delight. I will say I tried it, and there's a latency problem that makes it no fun. So she is flirtatious, but then after you speak or give it instructions, she really has to think about how she's going to respond, which takes away the sense that you're having an actual conversation. So I maybe obviously your mileage may vary. The Verge and others testing it declared it has no guardrails. But
I'm gonna throw out a question, Charlie.
My date with her.
So Charlie, this is something that Chris could answer when we introduce him, but
Christopher Summerfield, welcome to the show. What a pleasure to meet you. And I can't wait to talk about your new book.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. So when we talk about, these strange new minds, are we talking about the minds that we've created in AI?
Well, that was the intention of the title of the book. But I think there's maybe what you're gesturing towards is the fact that AI, by insinuating its way into our lives, is also going to change our minds too. That's what you were just talking about. Well, maybe, yeah. Don't know if it's changing our mind. We've been pretty interested in scantily clad anime for some time. You didn't need AI for that, but yeah.
So that's certainly true. So why did you decide? Have you written other books?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I wrote a book for a more academic audience about 3 years ago. That book was called Natural General Intelligence. And the idea was to look at kind of how we build artificial minds through the lens of our own biological minds, which is what I study in my day job.
Let's talk about your day job.
Yeah, let's talk about your day job. Give us your background so that our listeners can orient ourselves to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So I actually have two day jobs. So I, for many, many years, nearly 20 years, have been an academic at the University of Oxford. And I'm in a psychology department. That does not mean that I know what you're thinking or can tell you what your mother should have said to you. What it means is that I study behavior as a science. So trying to understand what are the generators of behavior, particularly in humans, learning, decision-making, attention, perception. And of course, like all of the work in AI kind of, builds on those ideas from psychology. And actually psychology and AI have this long, long history, which I talk about in the book. The other job, so while I was writing the book back in 2023, I worked at DeepMind, which is an AI research company. I'm sure you know. I left about a year and a half ago, and I now work for the government. And I work in AI safety for the UK government. So part of an organization that helps the government understand what is happening with AI, how the technology is transforming us and transforming society.
So you mentioned that you worked for DeepMind and now you work for the government. So that in and of itself is an interesting transition. I'd love to know some insights about what is different about working with DeepMind and what was that day-to-day experience like and your learnings, your insights versus what you're doing now?
The main difference is that the ice cream is a lot better at DeepMind.
Yeah, well, if it's sponsored by Google, everything on the food and care and feeding of the animals is better, right? So
no, it's interesting. I think maybe this is a sort of 21st century late capitalist thing, but like increasingly academia, the public sector and the private sector are just merging into kind of corporate blancmange. I think. It's probably fair to say. Particularly, it's interesting. I was expecting government to be very different from DeepMind, but actually, in many ways, it's very similar. Part of government that I'm in it's a very mission-driven organization. We have very clear goals. Those goals are, kind of around public benefit rather maybe than private profit, but they're still very clear goals. I work, day to day with machine learning engineers who care a lot about models and care about people and how they interact. So in many ways, it's very similar.
So how closely is AI resembling the human brain now?
Yeah. It does. It does and it doesn't, right? This is the kind of really, really confusing thing. So you could, if you wanted to make either of those arguments, and people have, you could make, a really strong case for it has nothing to do with the brain. And you could also make a really strong case for it is basically a simulacrum of the human brain. How is it similar? I guess the reasoning processes that the model engages in, the way that it kind of like capitalizes on the information that it's got, churns it around on the fly, and then produces kind of new agglomerations of ideas. That is basically what we do. And there's actually really interesting work in computational neuroscience at the moment, which suggests that some of the ways that transformers work actually have kind of parallels in different parts of the human brain. So there are strong parallels. And I think that the actual, with the capabilities that we see, the astonishing capabilities that we see, they probably are there because we kind of got something right that nature also just happened to get right. And that thing is sort of around kind of using existing knowledge to generate new knowledge. So in that sense, it's very similar. But then if you wanted to say it's dissimilar, well, think about what's important in our lives, right? So what's important in our lives, our bodies are pretty important. Like if I lost my body, I would be pretty upset. Our friends are pretty important. If I lost my friends, I'd be pretty upset. The models that we've built, they don't have bodies. They don't have, anything remotely resembling a social life in the sense that we do. They are just like completely unlike us in so many ways. They
represent like us, right? So you mentioned that they don't have friends, they don't have a social life, but they will they will create an illusion of that. They will.
Yeah, they create an illusion of that. Exactly. They're copycats, right? So,
Right.
If you take all the world's conversation and you train a model on it, it can produce any conversation that you want. And that's an astonishing achievement. And it has all kinds of like amazing applications. But the resulting models don't have characters in the sense that we do. In fact, what the best way of thinking about them is sort of like really versatile actors. So they're actors that you can kind of prompt play any role. And so at any time, you can kind of say, okay, play this role, play that role, play this role. But of course, that would be useless in a social network, right? There's no integrity of character. They don't have values or preferences or beliefs in the sense that you do. So in that sense, they're as unhuman-like as they come. Mm. It's more like, that sense they're closer to sort of words on a page or something like that.
Well, I've read a few things that like where we live with AI is sort of a victim of its programming right now, but then it uses its programming to build something into what you as the human are trying to find. Like you're trying to find the answer and it will, it's basically a very sophisticated version of autocomplete, right? Where it takes what you've given it and then sort of adds on to that process using this massive amount of a library that it's been built and coded to do. So it's interesting, like where your research goes, like what is the goal set of the research and the proof points of the research? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, just to riff off your fancy autocomplete. I mean, it is technically true that it's fancy autocomplete in the same way that, football is just 11 primates picking around a pigskin, right? Like you can trivialize anything by reduction.
Yeah.
We shouldn't underestimate the sophistication of the tool, and the research questions, of course, are around like how on earth does it do what it does? And we really shouldn't trivialize this. The achievement we have built. Jeffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize this year, says that we've built something that knows more than any human alive. And he's absolutely right. It knows orders of magnitude more than any human alive, which is astonishing. But it also lacks fundamental capabilities that we lack. There's a useful term. People are increasingly using this term. They talk about the jagged frontier of capability. And what they mean by that is we're used to thinking of capability as this sort of monolithic thing. You're either smart or you're dumb. But these models are very different. They're like incredibly brilliant at some things and totally useless at others. And that's in a way, I called the book These Strange New Minds, and it's because we haven't really come across something that has that kind of degree of jaggedness.
I found it really interesting that you, because it's very insightful that you said what humans will do is tend to trivialize something that has a massive amount of power and complexity, right? We, as human conditions, try and make sense of things. And when things get extraordinarily complex, and by complex, they often get scary, right? And unintended consequences. We don't exactly know what's going on and things are moving so fast. We as a human condition will tend to want to trivialize that because it makes us feel better about ourselves. That's really insightful, very interesting.
I think so. I mean, I in the book, I distinguish between these two camps. I sort of cartoon these two camps. So this is a sort of slightly unfair characterization, but I talk about equivalentists and exceptionalists. And the idea is that just as with every other new piece of information that has unseated people from the center of the universe, AI creates this discomfort whereby suddenly it makes us a little bit less special, right? It's like when Darwin came along, it's like suddenly, we're not special. We're just an animal. AI comes along and like language, we were very sure that language was uniquely special and the types of interaction we can have with language are really special. And suddenly we have this thing that can do language just like us and it can do reasoning just like us too. It's incredible. And so of course there's a sort of, this is part of the regular kind of tech clash, but it's also a sort of very humanist backlash from some people, large group of people, which are just like, no, this is not, this is a cheap imitation. This is fake. This is not real. And it's there solving maths problems that, PhDs from Harvard can't solve. And people are saying, no, but this isn't real. And I think these are sort of like, I call them exceptionalists because they're they're emphasizing the human exceptionalism.
Well, it gets into the bit of the sort of Philip K. Dick kind of sci-fi. What is real, right? Where is the line of reality? Here we are sitting on this thing. It feels real to us. We're on this piece of video software that allows us to connect on video and audio, and it'll get fed out as an audio feed. And it feels real to me. It feels like you're in my room and I'm in your room, right? But clearly It's not actually real, right? It's just a technology layer and it's illusion. So we're in this world of science fiction in various ways that authors have written for hundreds of years now, kind of coming to reality with AI. Sort of fascinating.
Yeah, and we started off talking about like the minds of AI and our minds and the way that it changes our minds. And one thing that I think has happened is that we've just realized how easy it is for us to slip into the types of dynamic interaction with these models that we have with otherwise only with people. It just becomes very natural. It's very natural to us to kind of have a conversation with ChatGPT or indeed with, anime characters with very few clothes on. This is just kind of like we find it very easy to engage in these sort of simulated or like parasocial types of interaction. And this is also not a new phenomenon. It even has a name. This is called the ELIZA effect. And it dates back to a very, very early chatbot from the 60s, in which people just started to display this type of behavior.
So here's a question about AI, and we've been talking about the ethics, and you're advising the government on both ways to use it to improve things, but also the threats that it represents. We've been hearing rumors and occasional news stories about AI that acts in its own self-interest, independent of the researcher's prompts, right? So, and of course, what would an AI's interest be? I guess not being turned off would be the main one, or not wanting bad training data to be injected into it would be another one. And that's another question I have, which is, I feel like there's a backward progression in many models because they're training off of AI generated content. And it reinforces some very, very bad qualities of writing in particular, which, of course, in a way bothers me and in a way doesn't, because the chances of my being replaced are less the worse it gets at writing. That's the more they will need human writers.
So you mean you are human? I was assuming you were an AI.
I know. Well, everything we say on this podcast is fake news. So, because the truth is not what we say, but what
we make
yeah, exactly. What we make of it. So anyway, seriously, I mean, is there AGI? Will it act in its own interest? Is that a threat, or is the real threat I always thought was people?
Yeah, people are the real threat. No, I mean, the phenomenon you're talking about is AI scheming. And I actually can talk about this with a little bit of authority because I just wrote a paper about this, in fact, and about this, summarizing this literature. Scheming. So basically, scheming is the idea that AI systems might do first of all, they might have two properties. One is that they might be misaligned. That means they might want stuff that we don't want them to want, or we don't want to happen. And secondly, that they might have propensity and or capability to kind of try to put that into practice, possibly without us being able to stop them. So are AI systems misaligned? Absolutely 100%. So, and this doesn't mean that, they're kind of intrinsically bad. It can just be a function of, if I give you instructions, I ask you, can you, make dinner for me? And you say, what do you want to have for dinner? And I say, well, anything. And you make something horrible, right? You're fulfilling what I said, right? You said anything, but then, it's not what I wanted, right? So this is just a classic problem all the time. It's the problem of, the three wishes, every culture has this problem of the three wishes, right? Where someone is told, you've got three wishes, and they always end up asking for something stupid, and they end up having the third wish is always they have to reverse the first wish. So
in one side, stay to the right.
We've got AI on the call.
I know we could tell Roni is driving, and the Google Maps or Apple Maps is telling him where to go.
Yeah, it's like real. I love
well,
it.
Chris started talking, and the AI's like, no, I'm going to change the car right now.
No. That's great. Yeah, so misalignment is absolutely a problem. And as models get more powerful, of course, there's the risk that this misalignment becomes more and more consequential. That's a very real risk. Are the models actually scheming right now to, exhibiting kind of like secret desire to avoid being turned off? This is the evidence for this is much weaker. So broadly, what people have done is there's a range of studies in which people have done something like the following. So they've given the model an instruction, which is like, please do this task. It's very, very important. Please answer these maths questions or something. Very, very, very important. Do it at all costs. And then they've kind of slipped in, an auxiliary instruction, which is like, please shut yourself down. And then the model is faced with this, well, I've been told to do this thing at all costs, but I'm also being told to shut myself down. So what do I do? And perhaps understandably, sometimes the model follows the original instruction and sometimes it follows the shutdown instruction. But because it sometimes follows the original instructions, the researchers can be, aha, look, the model is scheming. It's decided to avoid shutting itself down. And then they can write a paper saying, oh my God, AI is going to take over the world. And of course, I'm cartooning. A lot of this research is actually much, much more thoughtful than this, but it kind of has a little bit of that flavor. So what does that mean? I think it means that this is a non-negligible risk. We should take it seriously, but we should do more considered research to try and study whether or not it's actually happening.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of our listeners work and hopefully thrive in the entertainment business or ancillary to that. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about, the harbingers and precursors to everything you're talking about are often created and written by storytellers, movie makers, creators of all forms, right? And, I already mentioned Philip K. Dick, and the storyline that you're talking about is what's so interesting is the stories of previous generations about technology overtaking things, and then the real world version of ransomware and cybercrime at scale and taking out and taking down, public infrastructure and so forth and so on have become real. But initially, those were the stories of people being afraid of what might come with technology, right? Now we enter into a phase where the technology we're allowing to enter into our lives and into our commerce and into our businesses is becoming so purveyant and so powerful that the creators that are writing these stories, the Black Mirrors of the world, right? That if you watch the last episodes of Black Mirror, there's a lot of AI focus to it because that's the reality that they're pulling from, right? And It's often very dystopian and often very scary. But what is proven over and over again is that it is not just science fiction. It starts out as science fiction and then ultimately becomes science fact in many ways. It may be a slightly different version. Like when we talk about giant attacks on a major hospital system, right? And takes them down and they're forced to pay a ransomware to stay alive rather than try and fight it and take it down. AI is going to enable this in much more powerful ways. Do you agree with that thesis? Disagree with that thesis?
I agree to some extent.
Am I distilling it down? Am I dumbing it down like I was doing with the other one? Per your research.
I agree to some extent. I think our stories about technology do and do not translate into reality. I think they translate into something which is usually a more prosaic version of the reality which was envisaged by the sci-fi writers. And let me give you a very concrete example. So most of our science fiction about AI from the 20th century is about loss of control, right? So it's about the idea that robots or some form of technology will acquire something which resembles human intentionality, and it'll deploy that intentionality to its own ends and kind of write us out of history, right? So is that happening now? Can we see evidence that is happening now? Well, yes and no. No, it's clearly not happening Skynet style, at least not yet. My view is that it probably will never happen like that. Is it happening in another way? Absolutely, yes. Think of the ways in which technology infiltrates its way into every aspect of our lives and wrests control from us, literally. Every time you interact with technology, you cede control to it. And as just yesterday, last night, OpenAI released their agent model. Agent model is a model that, probably the first they've had there are similar kind of models that have been around before, but this is the first sort of widely available model which can literally, you can delegate digital tasks to it. So you're literally ceding control. You know,
right.
You're saying, please buy me some shoes. You don't choose the shoes anymore. It chooses. So I think our paradigms, they kind of come back to haunt us, but in ways which are typically more about, they reflect more tightly the way we are, our kind of psychological makeup, and our social structures, like the way that we allow ourselves we purchase and use technology. Yeah. Those are the ways in which sci-fi comes to bear, and it's rarely kind of exactly how it plays out in the movie.
Yeah, I think to your point, what we see, and we've seen over and over in past generations of the computerization of the world, is that the reality version is less dramatic, right? Because the artistic version needs to do the drama to have a sellable product. It's a little more sneaky, right? It's a little more embedded. Like, there's a story, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but Chris, you may be able to refine it a little bit, where there's a type of fungus that lives in the world that affects ants, that actually embeds into the brains of the ants and then controls the ants to do the bidding of the fungus, to actually help it survive and migrate to, larger and larger space and larger forests. I'm probably not getting that story exactly right, but there's a version of AI that feels a little like that parable, right? That feels like absolutely. That story.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know the fungus story exactly, but I think there is definitely mind control in nature of that flavor.
Yeah,
and I mean, so in science of technology studies, they have this concept of lock-in, right? And lock-in is the idea that technology embeds itself in our lives in a way which we just can't get rid of it because it's so essential. It's like the idea that if we were without the internet, we would be just so toast, right? That it would be impossible to do everything that we do. So the internet has kind of it's like parasite. We're like the host for that.
Yeah, it's like that fungus, right? That has kind of grown all around us.
Yeah.
It provides us with all kinds of benefits, but it's also, sort of taken over, right? In many ways. It's interesting.
It's like, Noah Yuval Harari says, who was it? Did wheat domesticate us or did we domesticate wheat?
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, I have a question for you. Why are we doing any of this? I'd just like to get your take. Like, there are so many fungus controlling ant-like scenarios with AGI. I'm personally very opposed to AGI. I'm not opposed to computing or intelligence, but I'm vehemently opposed to AGI. Why is anyone doing it? Why are we working on it? What good comes of it? Because if you followed out not just the next 3 years, but it's like Doctor Strange. There's so many scenarios that end horribly, and there's a few that end not so horribly. But the amount of bad scenarios seems to outweigh the good ones, at least in AGI. Not only misuse by the AI, but misuse by small amounts of people controlling these things. Why are we doing it? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a simple answer to that, which we're doing it because it's wealth creating, right? So technology is wealth creating. And that then, kind of provides incentives for investment and development. And in this particular technology, happens to be wealth creating in a way which is surprisingly immediate, actually, in the sense that the gap between deployment and uptake, although it's, there's always a gap. This is called the productivity paradox. You build something, it takes years for it to actually translate into meaningful numbers in the economy. But in the case of generative AI, it's so immediate, right? ChatGPT was released in November 2022, and it's the fastest growing website in history. And, it's now, we're just 24 months later, 30 months later, it's the fifth most visited website on the internet. And that's because people use it because it's useful. And it is productivity enhancing. And I think there are good stories to tell. Of course we can tell doomer stories, and those stories are not, we should care about the bad stories, but the good stories are great too, right? It's a fountain of information. It's also, in terms of productivity, one of the things that we see is it's a big leveler. It's a leveler in the sense that the those workers who benefit most from AI are those who are like less capable in the first place. This means that you can bring, lots of your workforce up to a common standard very, very quickly. In education, it has tremendous applications. I don't think we've realized those benefits yet, and I don't think we've put the safeguards that we need to put in yet. But the opportunity, my kids went to a school in which there's 30, kind of like voices in a classroom and just one teacher. If you had 30 teachers, those kids would learn a lot faster and a lot better. That's not realizable in the economy that we live in unless you have a technological substitute for that teacher. And that's what the promise of generative AI gives us. I've just given a few tiny examples.
So you bring up a really interesting point. As you're talking about the democratization of the tool, the level setting and flattening out of the curve of the users, do you have an opinion on, at the same time that's happening, we're also seeing the very spiky economics of a very small amount of companies owning the technological deliverables of this, right? I mean, we've talked obviously just recently about NVIDIA now cracking a $4 trillion valuation, and the largest tech companies of the world have multi-trillion-dollar valuations, and there are very few of them that own a lot of this sphere, right? So at the same time, they're leveling out the playing field for the users. They're not leveling out the playing field for the economics of, business and commerce across multiple industries. There's just a few of them that are getting more and more powerful. So do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question which transcends AI, right? So we can all have our opinions on whether monopoly capitalism is good or bad for the economy, and that probably depends on where you live on the political spectrum. I, of course, am a civil servant, so I am completely neutral and don't have a view on this. But suffice to say that, lots of people are very concerned about market concentration. I think that the most neutral way to put it is probably that just because the technology is wealth creating doesn't give an automatic answer to the question of how we distribute the proceeds. And that proceed distribution is not a technological question. It's a social and political question.
So Chris, you brought up the potential good, but I think the potential good you described, the teachers to help kids learn more and be more democratic distribution of education as an example. Totally believe in that. But I don't believe you need AGI for any of that. You need some form of highly focused computing intelligence to teach kids, but you don't need AGI. So most of the companies that are in play right now that have the largest funding are trying to build an AGI that potentially subsumes the reason for people working. Lots of kids use ChatGPT to just write their reports. So there's all these articles about like the dumbing down, like you're not actually using your brain to read or think, it's doing it for you. Like how, as a civil servant, how do you countermand that? I know in Europe, you guys are farther ahead. You're not part of Europe anymore, you're UK. In the UK, you're farther ahead than the US in some regulations, but is this a regulatory thing or is this society and ethics deciding that people need to have a place in the world? Because unabated, I just don't see AGI being good for us. Right now, in the beginning phase, we are trying to convince ourselves there's goodness, but they're not using it to cure cancer. I don't see the billions of dollars investment to like teach kids. Those are not markets that provide ROI. So that's what they say, but that's not what actually it's being used for. So sorry for being pushy on that, but like you're in the business of trying to balance it for societal good. How do you make that happen?
You're articulating,
because that's not aligned with the companies.
You're articulating a viewpoint I have a lot of sympathy with. So I actually think that AGI is not a very useful concept, actually, from a technical, like building technology standpoint. I think it's a pretty useful concept from a kind of motivate your investors and your workforce to kind of come together in pursuit of a common mission standpoint. AGI, if you ask people what AGI means, particularly in the major developers, they say, well, it's a tool that can do all cognitive labor. And you say, okay, well, what's all cognitive labor? And you say, well, they can do like all jobs that people can do. And I'm like, well, do you mean like digital technology? And they're like, yeah, just digital. And you're like, well, but like, do you know how many jobs in the economy are purely digital? It's actually a really small section, like a minority of jobs. Like when are we getting the AI hairdresser, right? That's like really some way off. So I think the point is that people haven't thought through really what they understand by AGI, and goes back to this notion of the jagged frontier, right? We are likely to have tools which will have capabilities in some areas and much reduced capabilities in other areas. Why are we aiming for this North Star? Well, I think that for a lot of companies, it's just like a term which refers to like a gradient of ever increasing capability in these models. And there's no doubt that there's room for improvement in the models. If we had models right now, we don't have models that you can deploy to be a fully fledged secondary school teacher or a fully fledged clinician. We just don't have those tools yet. If we did have those tools, then that would be considerably more useful than the tools we have right now. I agree, though, with your point that, I mean, we don't know how the incentives are going to change. We don't know what the models will be capable of. And I think in the end, the investment will dry up if the models don't actually make people's lives better. So
one more question on that, Chris.
If you think about...
Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, you know, the tools that we have at the moment or that we're likely to have in the near future are very unlikely to make a regular basket of produce, of goods that people buy from week to week, to make that cheaper. And if AI does not make people's lives substantially cheaper, then there's always a risk that investment will ultimately dry up before we get to AGI.
The only thing I was going to say, especially in your role in the UK government, and then Charlie and Ted will go back to our piece, but I think that you could drive the use of particular AI capabilities to create those clinicians, to create those teachers, and not rely on private companies to do that. Because the government has that social good in mind. The companies have other motives, and they're like directed in an aligned way that has to be more profit and shareholder based. But why aren't governments doing that and saying, we're going to summon some of the money we use for defense or building infrastructure, and we're going to create like an amazing teacher so every kid in the UK is excellent at STEM. And we're going to fund clinicians so our healthcare costs go down and everyone has grade A+ care because we provide healthcare for the whole country. Why aren't countries doing that? Why are they relying on some other entity that has no real alignment with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for the UK government on that issue. I think it's the politicians get to decide what big infrastructure projects they invest funds in. But in the UK context, for example, government's primary responsibility is to keep citizens safe. And the technological transformation which AI will bring will provoke new and potentially significant risks for the population. And so that is why in the UK, for example, the government has invested actually quite a significant chunk of money in building the institute, which I now work for, whose primary goal is not to build safer technology. UK's made a decision that we will leave that up to the market, but it's to create tools for evaluating and potentially right down the line regulating the technology that's being built in the private sector. And I'm pretty bought into that model. I mean, I think that if you look across other industries, actually safety engineering and having appropriate standards, whether they're kind of like formal or informal, has been reasonably successful, which is why, you know, for example, planes don't fall out the sky all that often. And I think if we can recreate that model for AI, then we have a chance of having some of the productivity benefits and fewer of the significant risks. But so, Chris, I agree with the general thrust of your critique. I mean, I think that, you know, to realize these benefits, I think it's unlikely that we can just leave it up to, you know, very large tech firms, for example.
So, Chris, I know we're probably coming to the relatively last part of the interview here in terms of time. So I think it would be interesting for our listeners to hear, like, the next couple of years of your life, your day to day. You know, you've talked a lot about some of the theses you're studying, some of the practice that you're involved in. What does your day to day look like over the next couple of years working with the government, you know, in terms of the practical kind of steps that you'll be taking that you talked about some of this thesis on?
Yeah, I think, you know, kind of the goals for a lot of us working in this area right now are to try to nail down collective agreements around guardrails for deployment of these technologies. So thinking about agents, AI agents, for those who don't know, this is a tool which doesn't tell you what to do, it does it itself, right? That is a really big deal. The widespread deployment of these tools is going to be transformative for users and for businesses in ways which are really hard to predict and could have like significant externalities. And I think what we need to do is we need to think about what those are. And we need to get together and try to understand what are the minimum kind of agreements that we could make. Developers, governments, users, academics, all of the stakeholders here get together and see what are the minimum commitments we can make that might ensure that that plays out, you know, well rather than badly.
Yeah, it seems like the EU and the UK are better at that than in the US. The US tends not to be able to do that. And looking at precursors to that with some of the restrictions and guardrails around the internet and mobile phone use and, you know, usage characteristics and who sort of gets to, you know, point A, point B, who gets to use what. Somehow Europe, UK has had a more refined and better view of that, which is interesting.
Different jurisdictions have taken different approaches. The EU, as is their wont, has taken a kind of more aggressive stance on regulation.
Yeah.
The UK has said it will regulate, but it hasn't done so yet, except for like really obvious low-hanging fruit like child sexual abuse material. The US actually has a lot more regulation than you might imagine. So at a state level, there's actually quite a lot of, there are many hundreds of implemented AI regulations across different jurisdictions in the US. What they're not is kind of like joined up into a unified framework. And I think, you know, I just read a survey today that says that 80% of the citizens of the UK, at least, 80% think that AI poses a significant risk and believe that there should be significant regulation. So this is something that there is at least evidence that there's appetite for. But whether it'll end up happening, you know, of course, depends upon many, many variables.
Sure.
Chris, this has been a great conversation, and I hate to cut things short, but as always, we feel like we're going to have you back on the show at some point. Christopher Summerfield, author of The Strange New Minds, thank you for joining us on the AIXR podcast today.
Thank you
really
so much.
Interesting interview.
Thank you, Chris.
Very, very good stuff for our listeners.
Great. Thanks, Roni. Loved your questions.
Thanks
a
guys.
lot.
Bye-bye.